Chapter 6. I had written countless letters and a novel by the time they opened the door, and I did not remember a single word of any of it. I did not remember what the 37 chapters were about. I did not know why I erased chapters 8 and 22 and rewrote them. I did not even remember if I wrote any of it or not. But I had a strong feeling that if I did not, then I would have been trapped in the room for a little while longer. I was utterly transfixed when they entered. I could not comprehend why this moment had come so soon. The lock of the door made a loud clunk and 2 nurses walked through the frame. I was lying in bed with my face towards the ceiling, the same way I had been since I started writing the letter to Timothy. But my head did not dare to turn in their direction, for I silently hoped I was imagining it. But I knew luck would never be on my side. "Sit up," one of them ordered. My body lay limp in defiance to my non-existent control over myself, trying to take my fate into its hands. "I will repeat myself only once," the nurse continued. "Sit up." My puppeteer was awoken. My legs hung down the bed and my body sat up straight. Each of the muscles was tensioned to its core. The drumming of my heart grew louder. It became harder to breathe. There was a wall surrounding me, threatening to collapse any second as it apprised me of the demolition ball coming our way. My wrists were tied to one another with a brown leather belt, allowing them to separate by only half a foot. My ankles were tied similarly with the space of a foot betwixt them. All the energy in me was draining out like the rainwater scurrying to the river flowing underground. I was completely numb. I could not feel anything, I could not hear anything, and I could only see the things I did not want to see. "Stand up," she said, and my body acceded without my mind processing all that was shown. I now witnessed myself from another's body. I was the 4th person in the room, watching the impotent, fatuous girl on the leash obeying the nurse's commands like an intelligent dog. I followed her hypnotized form as she walked, while sandwiched by the 2 nurses who took her down a flight of stairs. The hallways wore a dark veil and made my skin crawl. The cool air was stifling, but she did not seem to be bothered by any of it. She was as emotionless as one could get. She did not seem to react to anything. Perhaps this was what dogs were supposed to do. Do what they have been told without questioning the orders. I was scared for her, for she did not seem to be part of it at all. She was going to a world of torment, and she did not seem to care. On the other hand, I felt everything amplify. The fate awaiting the young girl terrified me. I could not imagine what electricity swimming under one's skin must feel like. I was sweating, my hands were clammy, my heart was racing, my eyes were watering, my breaths were shallow and painful. The pain in my legs threatened to bring me down to my knees, but I did not care. I wanted to know what was going to happen to her. I wanted to know if she would survive, because I never could. We stopped in front of a room that stood underneath the letters, "Electrotherapy." They seemed to have pulled me back into the girl. Now that I was here, all the calm and composure she exhibited collapsed. I was too weak to maintain her facade. A heavy weight was placed upon my shoulders, holding me to the ground. As tears started to stream down my face, and I started begging them not to take me in. The quieter of the 2 nurses told me not to worry and that nothing will happen, but in this world of lies, could I trust her? I mumbled I was sorry, but what was I sorry for? It took me a while to think of an answer. For existing. I did not mean to exist. It was beyond my grasp. The door opened where a man of an unremarkable height stood all alone, as if awaiting the president's arrival. He had his hands clasped before his bulging belly. A sincere smile spread across his face. Oval-shaped spectacles framed his green eyes. The sunlight entering from the window at the back flooded the room and shone against his smooth yellow head, which wore a halo, while the skin below his chin folded itself into layers, ready to be straightened out with a rolling pin. He was dressed in proper black suit, with the 3 strands of his hair combed to the left side of his head. Beside him was a bed, and in front of him was a device resting on a movable table, and despite never seeing it before, I knew what it was. I eyed the paraphernalia, then raised my eyes to look at him. I did not move. The statue began to move its lips, then separated its hands. "Hello, Miss Jenkins. I'm Dr. Norring. I'm sorry," I interrupted and gasped as fresh tears wetted my cheeks in sync with my aching heart. "Please, I'm sorry. Please don't do this to me." I sobbed as I hunched forward and cried like an infant. My body felt too heavy for me to carry. The muscular strains were unbearable and felt like they were trying to tear themselves apart. "Oh, my dear child, you don't need to worry," he said in a compassionate voice, and gestured the nurses to bring me to the bed, to which they obliged, and I labored to resist their crushing holds. "You are not the first one who is going through this experience. This machine has been in use for years now." I was now laid down on the stretcher covered with white sheets. I can easily swear that I was trembling with fear. I could not stop moving. I felt sweat mixing with the tears that had not dried yet, bringing forth a new flavor of fear and pain combined. "You won't feel a thing," he said, as he used a stick to apply a moist substance to the sides of my head. I stared up at the faces, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. Did I look as big to them as they looked to me? One of the nurses put something in my mouth, saying, "So that you don't bite your tongue off." Did that matter? In a world of greed and capitalism, my words did not matter. Although the pounding of my heart was deafening me, I could make out the conversation of the doctor and the nurses, informing me the institute had not bought anesthesia for more than a year now due to the lack of funding. I would have screamed, but self-inflicted shocks welcomed me before the artificial ones could. "And just remember," the doctor continued, "this is going to be good for you. It'll help you." I was the fifth person in the room. Her eyes were bloodshot and open wide and rolling towards all directions as she moved her head from side to side and labored to speak through the rubber substance that rested in her mouth. Her hands reached her torso and they too shuddered along with the rest of her body. She was scaring me already. Something, which looked like a pair of earmuffs to me, was put on her head that touched either side of her shemples, making her squirm, and her eyes began to water once more. I opened my eyes to darkness. I could not tell if it was the darkness of my mind or that it was of a lightless room. It was quiet, too quiet. I was tired as well. I closed my eyes again. I opened my eyes to light. The blinding light made me shut my eyes in an instant once more. I pressed them in with the heels of my hands until darkness took over completely. This time I opened my eyes to face a nurse with pursed lips. Her hands were gripping my arm. "Finally, you're up." She took her hands off me where I could see red marks and impressions of her fingernails. "You've been asleep for an entire day, and I've been trying to wake you up for hours now." She paused and walked towards the door, and before leaving she said, "You should be ready in 10 minutes. I'll be taking you to breakfast." I was still in my room. Had I been dreaming all along? Had I really been asleep for a day? Was she telling the truth? Why would she lie? Why had I been asleep for so long? I could not waste forever in this room with these unanswered questions running through my head, so I got up and got ready for breakfast. For some reason I did not feel so horrible today, apart from having to silence my loud stomach. But then I remembered what they did to me. I could never have imagined being subjected to such excruciating pain. It made me want to dig a hole in the ground and bury myself there. To think this could go on for a couple of months was placing myself in hell before dying. If I had ever fantasized about dying, I was wrong to do it back then, for now it truly seemed like a dream. Then a fear crawled into my heart. My eyes landed upon the door. Was she lying? Was she really taking me to breakfast or somewhere else? Petrified, I stared at the door that was going to burst open any second while I sat in the corner where the bed surrendered itself to the two walls. Time was no longer an abstract concept, but laid itself before me to trace my fingers over the seconds and minutes that passed. True to her word, she indeed returned, and I could not move. "Why aren't you coming?" she asked, standing at the door for a few seconds. My immovable bones answered her, making her say, "Look, you need to walk and come outside where you can see sunlight or you'll go crazy in here." But wasn't that the point? She tapped her foot impatiently and I slowly got up, foolishly believing her words, for all I knew was that she could be tricking me into going to the room that was to haunt my dreams. From the dim room we entered the dim passage which winded into naught and was joined and left by other passages. We went on and on with my empty stomach and her full one. Hitherto I could see the reflection of sunlight enter the end of the passage. Just the presence of the wonder was enough to drape a blanket of calm over me as it extended its soft fingers towards me and interlaced them in mine, and reassured me of the possibility I could be made all right. We entered the light-filled hall, which hosted a long dining table that stretched off for miles. There were 2 small windows on the left side. Despite being small and letting in only a bit of light, I felt like a rough hand had grabbed my shirt from behind, pulling me back from the edge of the abyss where I stood with one foot firm on the ground and the other above the hole where my legs dangled, teasing the hole and myself. The walls were grey as they exhibited the use of bricks in the old Grand Institute. I was made to sit at the table with a bowl of porridge before me. I despised porridge. I stared at the bowl in front of me and laboured not to gag at the shapeless substance that stared back at me. "Eat it," said the nurse, but I could do no such thing. "Eat it," she said, pausing between the words this time. I blocked my sense of smell, for I knew I could not avoid eating the ugly thing. Lifting the spoon to my mouth, I eyed it suspiciously before opening my mouth and putting in the distasteful bite. I felt nauseated. Feeling a force at the back of my throat, stopping the porridge from entering the pipe, I gagged it back into the bowl. The nurse looked at me with her eyes set in a deep stare and her eyebrows stretched themselves in an unladylike manner. "So this is how it's going to be." Paranoia embraced me, making me move my hands frantically, and my mouth begged for a second chance. The nurse looked at me with an expression stating, "Hurry up." I did not want to go back to that room, so I took in a deep breath and released it, held the spoon, brought it up, stopped my nose from smelling it, opened my mouth and put the spoon in it. The nurse was satisfied as I attempted to gulp down the bite that tasted like worms squirming in soil. I was on the road to success where a car hit me. My throat was more revolted than usual today to see me trying to feed myself this garbage. The nurse took no more and grasped my arm as she strutted out of the light-satiated hall and into one of those dark, dusty tunnels, pulling my stumbling body behind her and ignoring my appeals. I did not want to go back in there. The appeals changed into hollers, and this was something I had noticed only when my throat started to hurt and my voice began to crack. The nurse had multiplied into 2 and both were pulling me into a room. In the dark room there was a duct for the light to enter, about the size of 3 bricks, one on top of the other. In the room rested a chair, and on that chair I was stranded, the leather dug into my arms and legs tightly, making me distinctly feel my pulse trying to push the straps away which did not bother to move a millimeter. Then my head had been pulled back where it was strapped to the head of the chair by the belt on my forehead. "You will eat, or you'll starve to death. We aren't going to tolerate this behavior, going without food for 3 days now," said the same nurse, who looked at me with grimace. Then I saw the tubes and a liquid. It was my meal. The nurse held a tube and stood in front of me where she demanded me to open my mouth. I sealed my lips shut and used my teeth to press down on them to keep them shut. The other moiled to open my mouth by pressing both my cheeks with her fingers and thumb, but to no avail, until there was a stinging pain spread across my left cheek. I had been scudded hard, and the suddenness of it had resulted in an unexplainable shock, leading to my guard dropping down. The other nurse plunged the tube into my mouth, where it poked all around like a child poking a new food for the first time, checking if the jelly had the ability in engaging the child in an animated discussion. The tube entered my throat, and my eyes watered and my lungs coughed, and the women continued doing their job. The fire in my throat made me feel like I was choking and vomiting at the same time. End of chapter 6.